I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny by this man. I will not. And the government will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny by this man. Not now, not ever.
So on the day of the speech, I was listening to Parliament in my job in Queensland, and I remember just feeling this well of emotion in the pit of my stomach just brim up. I could feel Prime Minister Gillard's rage. I could feel her exasperation and her frustration.
The Leader of the Opposition says that people who hold sexist views and who are misogynists are not appropriate for high office. Well, I hope the Leader of the Opposition has got a piece of paper and he is writing out his resignation. Because if he wants to know what misogyny looks like in modern Australia, he doesn't need a motion in the House of Representatives, he needs a mirror. That's what he needs.
The context of what she was doing the speech in, but those words, the emotion and the fury and the pride behind them really affected me, and I think affected a lot of other people, because it was the first time we'd actually heard her stand up and comprehensively say enough. And it felt like she wasn't just saying enough about what she was experiencing, she was saying enough about the whole deal, about what was happening in politics in general, about the viciousness and the personalization and the misogyny and the sexism and just the casual jokes that were really dressing up just the most vile and abhorrent behaviour, and enough to Australia being the worst version of itself.
And then, of course, I was offended too by the sexism, by the misogyny of the Leader of the Opposition catcalling across this table at me as I sit here as Prime Minister. If the Prime Minister wants to, politically speaking, make an honest woman of herself, something that would never have been said to any man sitting in this chair. I was offended when the Leader of the Opposition went outside in the front of Parliament and stood next to a sign that said, "Ditch the witch." I was offended when the Leader of the Opposition stood next to a sign that described me as a man's bitch. I was offended by those things. Misogyny, sexism, every day from this Leader of the Opposition.
You could hear the despair when you were talking to people about politics in general. And it wasn't what was happening at a local level, it was about what was happening at a federal level, and just how upsetting it was to see our first female Prime Minister being treated in such an abominable way, and what that meant for women and young people who wanted to get into politics. It really felt like there wasn't a place for us.
We are now supposed to take seriously that the Leader of the Opposition is offended by Mr Slipper's text messages, when this is the Leader of the Opposition who has said, and this was when he was a minister under the last government, not when he was a student, not when he was in high school, when he was a minister under the last government. He has said, and I quote, in a discussion about women being underrepresented in institutions of power in Australia, the interviewer was a man called Stavros. The Leader of the Opposition says, "If it's true, Stavros, that men have more power, generally speaking, than women, is that a bad thing?" And then a discussion ensues, and another person being interviewed says, "I want my daughter to have as much opportunity as my son." To which the Leader of the Opposition says, "Yeah, I completely agree. But what if men are, by physiology or temperament, more adapted to exercise authority or to issue command?" Then ensues another discussion about women's role in modern society, and the other person participating in the discussion says, "I think it's very hard to deny that there is an underrepresentation of women," to which the Leader of the Opposition says, "But now there's an assumption that this is a bad thing." This is the man from whom we're supposed to take lectures about sexism.
I think it resonates because it came from a place of absolute fury that not only Prime Minister Julia Gillard felt, but every woman, every marginalised community, everyone who's been told that they're too much, that they need to sit down and listen. Everyone felt that rage, and everyone was like, yes, I will not be lectured to, because of the hypocrisy of so many of the messages that were being flung at the Prime Minister.
I will not ever see the Leader of the Opposition seek to impose his double standard on this parliament. Sexism should always be unacceptable. We should conduct ourselves as it is, should be always unacceptable. The Leader of the Opposition says do something. Well, he could do something himself if he wants to deal with sexism in this parliament. He could change his behaviour, he could apologise for all these past statements, he could apologise for standing next to signs describing me as a witch and a bitch, terminology that is now objected to by the front bench of the opposition. He could change a standard himself if he sought to do so.
Because if you talk to anyone in the political class, they'll always give you the context. They'll always say, oh, well, she was defending the Speaker, Peter Slipper, at the time, and that's because she was trying to protect her own side because there was all this controversy going on about one of her MPs and yada, yada, yada. And all of that is important and is part of the story. But that speech was separate to that. That speech was born from that moment, but it was about all of everything else that Julia Gillard had put up with in politics, and particularly as a leader. And that moment is the reason why it has transcended, because she wasn't just addressing what was happening in the parliament and in politics. She was addressing her experience in life.
And the Leader of the Opposition should think seriously about the role of women in public life and in Australian society, because we are entitled to a better standard than this. Yeah.